There are people who grow up surrounded by noise, and there are people who grow up surrounded by silence that later turns into something powerful. Tyla belonged to the second kind. Before the world ever heard her voice, before her name began appearing on screens across continents, before her music became part of global conversations, she was simply a young girl growing up in Johannesburg, a city full of movement, energy, and sound, but inside her personal world, things were more quiet than people would expect. Tyla Laura Seathal was born on the 30th of January 2002 into a family shaped by different cultures and histories. Her background carried Indian, Zulu, Mauritian, and Irish roots. That mix did not just influence her identity, it quietly influenced her way of seeing life. Even as a child, she never felt like she fit into only one box. There was always something layered about her presence, even before she understood it herself. Growing up, music was not something she was pushed into. It was something she naturally gravitated toward. It didn't start as a career dream. It started as emotion. She would listen to songs and feel something she could not explain. Not just enjoyment, but connection. While other children heard music and moved on quickly, Tyla stayed in it longer. She paid attention to tone, to rhythm, to feeling. She began noticing how certain voices carried emotion even when the lyrics were simple. Artists like Rihanna, Aaliyah, and Beyoncé became early influences, not because she wanted to become them, but because she wanted to understand how they did what they did. How did a voice become powerful without being loud? How did a song become unforgettable without complexity? Those were the questions forming quietly in her mind. At school, she lived a normal teenage life on the surface, friends, classes, routines, small conversations. But internally, she was different. She observed more than she spoke. She imagined more than she expressed. And most importantly, she started thinking about music not just as entertainment, but as something she might one day build her life around. But dreams at that age rarely feel stable because the world around her was practical. People talk about stability, careers, and safe choices. Music, especially in the beginning, does not look safe. It looks uncertain. It looks like something you do on the side, not something you build a future on. Still, Tyla kept returning to it, not loudly, not publicly, quietly. She began recording herself, experimenting with her voice, trying to understand how she sounded in different emotional states. It wasn't professional yet. It wasn't polished. It was exploration. A young artist trying to understand herself before trying to understand the world. And this phase matters more than most people realize because before recognition comes discovery. Before success comes repetition. Before confidence comes awkward attempts that no one sees. For Tyla, those early recordings were not about perfection. They were about identity formation. Every attempt taught her something new about tone, emotion, and delivery. She began realizing that her strength was not in overpowering vocals. It was in softness, control, and feeling. That realization would later become one of her biggest artistic signatures. But at this stage, there was still no external validation, no audience response, no industry attention, just silence. And silence can be dangerous for people chasing creative dreams. Because silence creates doubt. There were moments where questions naturally appeared. Is this working? Is this realistic? Am I wasting time? These thoughts do not always come loudly. Sometimes they come quietly at night in small moments when everything slows down. But instead of stepping away, Tyla stayed with it. She kept practicing, kept listening, kept refining. And slowly, something important began happening internally. She stopped trying to sound like others and started trying to understand what made her sound like herself. That shift is subtle, but it is powerful. Because most artists begin by imitation. Few survive long enough to find identity. Tyla started moving toward identity early. As she continued experimenting, she also began engaging more seriously with the idea of creating music. Social media became a small but important space for her, not for fame at first, but for feedback. A place to test ideas, see reactions, and slowly understand how people responded to her sound. At first, the response was minimal. Small numbers, limited attention. Quiet posts that did not travel far. But even that taught her something important. Growth is not always visible at the beginning. At some point, she began working more intentionally, and this is where her path started shifting from personal exploration into early artistic development. Collaborating with producers helped her understand structure and direction. One of the key influences during this phase was Kool Drink, who helped shape how her ideas could be turned into full songs rather than just vocal experiments. This stage marked a transition. She was no longer just experimenting with sound. She was learning how to build music, and that change matters. Because once an artist starts understanding structure, everything shifts. Ideas become intentional, recordings become shaped. Emotion becomes guided instead of random. Still, success was not immediate. There was no sudden breakthrough, no viral moment yet, no global attention. Just slow progress. But progress nonetheless. One of the earliest signs that things were starting to shift came when she worked toward her earlier releases, including the growing attention around her music leading into Getting Late. At the time, it was not yet a global phenomenon, but it represented something important: visibility. People were beginning to notice. Not in massive numbers yet, but enough to signal movement, enough to show that her voice was no longer staying in one place. And for an artist in the early stages of their journey, that is everything, because recognition is not just about numbers. It is about direction, and Tyla's direction was finally becoming clear. She was no longer just a girl with a dream. She was becoming an artist in progress, and the world was slowly starting to lean in. For most artists, success arrives slowly, like a door opening inch by inch. But for Tyla, everything changed in a way that felt almost unreal when it finally happened. Not because she wasn't ready, but because the world wasn't expecting her rise to happen so quickly. Before the global attention, before the interviews, before the constant online discussions about her name, she was still building step by step in Johannesburg. She had already gone through the silent years, the experimental phase, and the slow growth stage. But what came next would not feel slow at all. It started with momentum that she could feel but not fully control. Her sound had been evolving for some time, shaped by earlier work and collaborations, including influences from Kool Drink. But what made everything different now was timing. The world was finally ready for what she had been building quietly. When Water began to take shape, it did not immediately feel like history in the making. At first, it was just another release in a crowded digital world. Artists release songs every day. Most disappear quickly, but this one didn't. It began spreading slowly at first, almost unnoticed. A clip here, a reaction there. Then something shifted. People started repeating it, then recreating it, then sharing it without even thinking twice. And suddenly, the sound was no longer local, it was everywhere. Through platforms like TikTok, the song began moving across countries faster than traditional promotion ever could. It wasn't marketing that carried it. It was people. Real people connecting with a feeling they couldn't explain but didn't want to ignore. And at the center of it was Tyla. What made this moment powerful was not just popularity, it was emotional resonance. Water carried a softness and rhythm that felt different from what global audiences were used to. It blended amapiano-inspired elements with a smooth, intimate vocal delivery that felt effortless. People didn't just listen to it, they felt it, and that feeling is what spreads music faster than anything else. Soon, what started online turned into something much bigger. The song was no longer just trending, it was becoming a cultural moment. Dance challenges appeared, influencers joined in, celebrities reacted, and suddenly, Tyla's name started appearing in conversations far beyond music spaces. For someone who started with silence, this level of attention was overwhelming in its own way. Because fame does not just bring success, it brings visibility without boundaries. Every part of her identity became a topic. Her sound was analyzed, her background was discussed, her rise was debated. Some people tried to categorize her strictly into one genre. Others saw her as something entirely new. But no matter the perspective, one thing was clear: people were paying attention. And attention changes everything. In a short time, her life transformed from quiet creative work into global recognition. Interviews increased. International platforms reached out. Her audience expanded beyond anything she had experienced before. She was no longer building a name, she had a name that was already traveling without her needing to introduce herself. But with this kind of breakthrough comes pressure that is often invisible to the outside world. Because once you have a global hit, the expectation becomes immediate: what comes next? That question can weigh heavily on any artist. It turns success into responsibility. It turns creativity into expectation. It turns excitement into pressure. For Tyla, this moment was both beautiful and challenging. On one hand, she had achieved something many artists dream of for years. On the other hand, she was now standing in a space where everything she did would be compared to her biggest moment. That is one of the hardest positions in music, but instead of rushing to chase another viral moment, she focused on something more important: stability. She understood that real careers are not built on a single song, but on the ability to grow beyond it. As attention continued to rise, she began performing on larger stages, reaching audiences that stretched across continents. Her presence became more visible, not just as a rising artist, but as a global figure representing a new wave of African-inspired sound entering mainstream spaces. Without forcing it, she became part of a larger shift happening in music. But while the world saw success, the internal experience was more complex, because rapid recognition comes with emotional adjustment. Suddenly, privacy becomes limited, opinions become constant, expectations become louder. Even silence becomes interpreted, and in that environment, staying grounded becomes a skill of its own. Tyla navigated this phase by staying connected to her music rather than the noise around it. She did not allow external pressure to fully define her direction. Instead, she continued building her artistic identity carefully, making sure she was growing in a way that felt authentic to her. That decision mattered because many careers change direction under pressure, but she chose consistency over reaction. As Water continued to grow globally, her influence expanded beyond music charts. Fashion, media, and cultural conversations began including her name. She became more than just a song at that point. She became a presence. And that presence carried meaning. Especially for young artists watching her journey from similar backgrounds, seeing someone from Johannesburg reach global recognition without abandoning their identity created a new sense of possibility. Her breakthrough was not just personal, it was symbolic. But even at this stage, Tyla's story is not defined as complete success. It is defined as transition, because breakthrough is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new kind of pressure, expectation, and growth. She is no longer trying to be seen, she is now learning how to be sustained. And that is where the real story continues. By the time Tyla fully entered global mainstream conversations, it was clear that her success was no longer temporary attention. She had moved beyond the stage of being called the girl with the viral song. She was becoming something much bigger, a lasting voice connected to a new generation of global music. As her career expanded, the stages became larger, the audiences became louder, and the pressure became heavier. But instead of collapsing under expectations, Tyla adapted to them. She understood that fame alone is not enough to survive in music. Longevity comes from evolution. And slowly, she began evolving in front of the world. Her performances carried more confidence. Her image became stronger. Her presence in fashion and media continued growing. International audiences who first discovered her through Water started paying attention to her beyond one song. That shift matters deeply for any artist, because many people become viral, but very few become respected beyond the viral moment. Tyla was beginning to cross that line. At the same time, her influence continued reaching beyond personal success. Whether intentionally or not, she became part of a cultural shift happening in global music. African-inspired sounds, especially amapiano elements, were entering international spaces more visibly than before. And Tyla's rise helped push that movement further into the mainstream. For many younger artists watching from places similar to where she started, her journey became proof that global success was possible without completely abandoning identity. She showed that softness could still carry power, and that an artist did not need to become louder to be seen. That became part of her legacy. Not just the music, but the feeling, the reminder that quiet beginnings do not limit massive endings. And perhaps that is why so many people connected with her story emotionally, because beneath the fame, the fashion, and the global attention was still the same young girl who once sat in silence, wondering whether anybody would ever truly hear her voice. Now millions had. Looking back at her journey, the contrast feels almost unbelievable. A girl recording herself quietly in Johannesburg eventually became an artist recognized across continents. Not because everything came easy, but because she stayed consistent long enough for opportunity to finally meet preparation. And even though her story is still unfolding, one thing is already certain. Tyla is no longer just an upcoming artist trying to find her place in music. She has already become part of a global conversation, a symbol of modern African music, reaching wider audiences. A voice that turns softness into strength, and a reminder that sometimes the people who change the world do not arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive quietly. This is Tyla. This is her biography.